Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. If you haven't been with us before, I'm your host, Kendall Fisher, and today we are covering the modern finance function with finance expert and FP&A advisor, Anders Liu-Lindberg. Anders and I will discuss how businesses can become more strategic and resilient in the face of change, which we've seen a lot of lately, as well as the ways companies can really harness the power of the topic of the year, AI, and automation to make their finance teams more efficient. We'll also cover how CFOs can really hone their FP&A strategies and where the ever-changing finance function is headed. There's a lot to get into, and we'll cover as much as we possibly can during our chat. But if you have additional questions, don't hesitate to use the comments on whatever platform you're tuning in from and ask away. And if you don't have any questions, that's okay too. Just give us a shout out in the comments. Tell us where you're tuning in from or how your finance team has become more efficient. We want to hear all the tips, insights, and strategies that you're using as well. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Anders Liu-Lindberg. Hi, Anders. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Kendall, it's great to be here. It's great to talk about a passion of mine, the modern finance function and where things are heading. So really excited for this.
Yeah, super excited to dive in. But before we do, I gotta, kind of set the stage here for our audience. As I just mentioned, you're a leading finance expert and FP&A advisor, but can you start by telling us a bit about your career history and background?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a finance practitioner turned consultant, which sometimes that's how the story goes. I used to work 13 years for global transport and logistics company Maersk, doing all sorts of finance roles, controller roles, finance manager, and all sorts of business finance roles as well. And along the way, I started writing and talking about that journey and the development of the finance function. And years later, it turned into building a consulting company where we help finance people become better at influencing decisions and managing the change that you just spoke about, Kendall. And now it's more than 300,000 followers on LinkedIn, and we have a weekly newsletter with close to the same amount of subscribers. So it's wild almost to think about that journey, but it's really born from a purpose of just wanting to help finance and FP&A professionals be successful in their careers and finance functions inside companies be better at what they do and just drive more value creation.
Absolutely. And, we all know the importance of the finance role in those decisions, as, it is the backbone of all the decisions that companies need to be making are backed, especially right now, by how we become more efficient and how we improve the bottom line, right? And speaking of that kind of modern finance function, you recently co-authored the ebook, The Modern Finance Function. Can you tell us a bit about this ebook and its importance right now?
Yeah, I mean, the finance function has been in what I call always-on transformation for the past, I think it's more than 2 decades now. And it can kind of lead to a bit of transformation tiredness. And if we never kind of take a stop and say, okay, where are we actually today? And maybe look back and say, how much have we progressed since then? And say, wow, things have actually progressed a lot. It can be difficult to push on to keep transforming the finance function, which is definitely needed, and I'm sure something we'll also touch upon in today's talk. So I kind of wanted to make a point in time and look at, okay, how far have we actually come? And that's actually pretty impressive. So that's what the Modern Finance Function ebook is all about.
Okay, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about the finance function and its history. What is that history and how has it evolved, as you just kind of alluded to?
Yeah, it's amazing that the system of debit and credit kind of still persists today, right? It's really what everything in a company boils down to at the end. You will see the effect on the P&L or the balance sheet. And of course, we also know that the bank never lies, right? So if you cannot get things to reconcile, then you're going to have a problem, right? The debits and credits, they don't really match up somewhere in the system. So even that, very simple technique, it's still the foundation and the basics for everything that we do throughout history, right? Then we have added technology on top of that. We have added the whole data question kind of on top of that, and now we're trying to figure out how do we use all that data to make better decisions. And now I kind of just took a few hundred years on kind of speed dial, but that's kind of where we're at, right? That we have all this data inside of companies, and it just keeps multiplying every year or every second, really, if you will. And it just becomes more and more challenging to figure out how do we use it for better decision making. And that's kind of where we are today. And I think most finance functions, they are kind of trying to tackle these issues here, but it comes all the way back to this debit and credit they invented many years ago.
Okay, so all this data, we've been talking about this for a long time now. All this data and the ability to take that, and really make sense of it and make the right decision. Tell me how technology plays a role in that. What are some of the biggest benefits of technology, for example, like cloud ERP, that can really help our finance and accounting teams make sense of the data and make those decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, imagine that you're recording transactions today using pen and paper. I mean, the best you can do there is just recording stuff, right? And of course, I know we've moved on from that a long time ago, but then imagine you're using, let's say, spreadsheets to try and capture a lot of information and transactions. It's almost impossible to try and analyze all that data. So of course, you have an ERP system, but because of cloud has kind of made ERP systems available to companies of all shapes and sizes, we get a lot more capabilities today than what we did maybe 20 years ago when you kind of had your ERP installed on premise, and it was only the bigger companies that had that luxury, and the others were kind of left to figure it out on their own. So a lot of new capabilities have really come into play to harness all the data that's also available today. So cloud plays a huge role in this, and it's really made a lot more tools accessible to us. I mean, I remember my days as a finance manager back in the early days of the last decade, where we did a lot of Excel stuff, and suddenly we were looking at travel expense management and saying, why are we having all these expense reports in Excel, and why are we manually attaching all these receipts to it when everything could be just use an app and be digitalized? And we're like, there should be a solution for that. So we found a solution and we implemented it, and everyone was just so much happier that they could just take a picture of the receipt and then kind of throw it out and be done with it. So it just, I know it's a simple example and there's a lot more to it, but it's a great example of what capabilities we get from cloud today that maybe wasn't there 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Well, and while that might be what you call a small example or a simple example, I mean, if you zoom out of that 50,000 feet and you look at the business at large, what when you automate, that's one process that you can automate, right? But all the other processes that you can automate, what business impact outside of finance and accounting does that have, that type of automation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can look at it from the inside and out, right? So from the finance team and out into the business. Go into most finance departments today and ask how they're doing. And I can almost guarantee you, Kendall, they're going to say, we're so busy. We're so busy doing stuff, and we don't even almost know what it is that we're busy doing stuff with, right? It could be closing the month end or the annual accounts or whatever it may be. They're so busy. And if you then kind of double click on the processes and the tools that they're using, you find spreadsheets in there, you find data tools, you find suboptimal processes. So they're spending so much time doing work that should really be almost click of a button today, right? And of course, if that's the case, if the business leaders are going to finance department and say, hey, we need your help in sorting out this business issue, or can you kind of look at all the data we got in from this last transaction we did? They're like, we're so busy, maybe next month or maybe next quarter. And of course, business leaders are like, well, then I can't really use my finance department for anything but control and compliance. And they'll go and build the solutions themselves or analyze the data themselves, which is, I mean, for me, I think it's a shame for finance that is like that, especially when the tools and the technology is available to do it smarter.
Right, exactly. And to your point, being able to, automate those really manual, that's what, when finance teams say they're busy, they're doing a ton of manual processes that is taking up their time, and they're not doing the work that they were actually hired to do, which is strategizing, working with leadership to make decisions. And when you have all of that together, the business can grow and succeed, right? But without the finance team backing that with, data and decision and the right decision making, that's when I think some of the poorer decisions are made, right? So another thing that the Modern Finance Function ebook talks about is data, as we talked about earlier and as we've kind of been talking about. But it states data has become currency in finance, and this is especially integral to AI tools, right? Data is what makes AI. But less than 40% of organizations are currently using data-driven insights, as we've just kind of discussed. But what we haven't hit on is the why. What really prevents these organizations from obtaining data-driven insights?
Yeah, I mean, let's start by just looking at the term of data-driven insights or data-driven decisions. We should, of course, be careful to say that only a decision driven by data is a good decision. I think what we have to say is a decision backed by data is likely a better decision than one that's not backed by data. But we shouldn't forget, of course, the experiences that the business leaders have from maybe spending decades in an industry or working in a company a long time. So it's really when the data-driven insights that you talked about, Kendall, meet the experience and gut feelings, let's say, of these business leaders. It's when all this come together that we can really make strong data-driven decisions. And to your point about only 40% making those data-driven decisions, it's because it takes time. It takes time to analyze the numbers, forget about actually producing the numbers, but analyzing the numbers, socializing those numbers with business leaders, discussing its meaning, and then together coming to a sort of a consensus or an agreement of what is then the best decision to move forward. And the fact is that most finance teams, because they're so busy and because they're not necessarily having everything working for them on the tools and the process side, they are just late to the table. So you're sitting there as a business leader, a sales manager, operations manager, and you're trying to make good decisions. Some could be rational, tactical, even the strategic decisions you also talked about. And you're like, it would be so great if finance was here at the table helping me sort out some of these decisions and showing me with data if I'm doing the right thing. But they're just never here when I need them because they're so busy. So it's that kind of, it takes too long time. And maybe we're not good enough at kind of socializing those insights, so we actually can compare them with the experiences of these business leaders.
So then, how do those companies and the finance team within those companies overcome those challenges? How do they really start using their data to fuel enhanced decision making and then eventually drive growth?
Yeah, I mean, first, of course, you need to automate your transactional work. I think, leading organizations, they have definitely pushed it past 60 or 70% of automating that work. But there's a lot of lacking organizations as well. Because if you cannot automate this, everything else will suffer because you have to spend time actually producing the numbers. The process is more manual, which means it's more error prone, which means you need to spend more time controlling the data. And I think you get the point, right, Kendall? So I think it starts with that automation. It starts with that good process of actually producing numbers. Because if I look at myself as a finance practitioner, all I want to do is use the number together with the business leaders that I support, right? So I think it's about that automation and having the good tools, the good processes to free the time for actually discussing what all this means. So if you're not well enabled by the tools and the technology, it's going to be a struggle, right? I mean, it's not that the technology, we can talk about the AI part maybe a bit later, but it won't give you all the answers. There's still a bit of human dynamics involved still. So if you're not there to actually having that human dynamics involved, then you're just not going to be using data-driven insights.
Right. Well, and one part of that, in talking about financial leaders being more strategic, right? CFOs want to be more strategic and want to be more involved in the decision making and less on the side of, just kind of figuring out the financials and all of that, but taking the financials and the data from that and then actually making strategic decisions. And one part of that is financial planning and analysis. How can finance leaders really hone their FP&A strategies, and what's the value in doing so?
Yeah, I really am trying to push CFOs and FP&A leaders to become more strategic leaders, right? So it's not just strategic finance, it's strategic business leadership that CEOs and other CXOs are looking for, right? And I think there it really comes down to understanding the strategy process first and foremost. Of course, there are different schools on this. But if you understand the strategy process, you can also drive this process, right? So I think a CEO wouldn't mind saying to the CFO, hey, you drive this process and I'll be a participant in it so that we get the good discussions around what the strategy should be. So there's something around the strategic process. And then strategy in itself, it's about making choices, right? So CFOs need to outline what are the choices we can make as a business, and then quantify and qualify those choices so that we can, speaking of data-driven decision-making, can actually say, okay, let's line up all these choices we have as a business and say what looks good, what looks bad, do we have the capabilities to execute on this, how we follow up on it, how can we drive this? So you have that high-quality discussion. I think that's the strategic leadership that CEOs are looking to CFOs to drive. And if they're not, of course, CEOs need to do it themselves or appoint other CXO members to do it. So I think it's a huge opportunity for CFOs and FP&A teams to drive this by understanding the process and understanding the choices that we can make. And then also understanding, okay, then let's say we make a choice, how do we then follow up on it, right? What are the assumptions behind this? How do we track these assumptions in close to real time as possible? And what do we do if the assumptions turned out differently than what we expected, or reality turns out differently? You know, what happens then? How do we then drive a good discussion? There's so much for CFOs and FP&A leaders to do in this space, and I really just want them to kind of, you know, take a step up and lead or drive this process.
So just as the finance function is evolving, the roles within that are also changing. You know, teams right now are expected to drive more results with fewer resources. We've all been talking about it and hearing about it a lot. It's all about doing more with less right now. So how can finance leaders empower their teams while also streamlining operations? It's a really tough balance act, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we have put this on a formula, if you will. We say it's all about insights times influence to have impact. Right? So impact could be value creation or whatever, you know, kind of a value creation definition you have in your company. And we talked about the data-driven insights before, right? And they're great. We definitely need those. But then there's a second part to the equation, which is the influence piece. You know, that's much more about people, interactions, building relationships, communication, understanding how different people act differently and why they do so. And I think those skills are not native to finance professionals. Those are skills we need to learn, because we probably went into finance because we recognized we're not good at this. We're not what I call people, we're numbers people. And now, because of technology is doing so, you know, such great advancements, we're actually needing to become people. So as a CFO, you need to enable your finance team with these people skills so they can actually become, let's call it influencers, or at least increase the influence that they have, so that the insights will count. Because if you have no insight, no influence at all, you know, it's one times the other, then of course the impact is zero. And that's just a real shame that we can't use these insights that have been generated from the analysis and everything else. So really those influential skills are what are needed, that CFOs need to enable their teams with that, apart of course from good tools and systems.
And that's in part what you're helping those finance folks to do, right? That's kind of the backbone of what you're coming forth with, which I think is cool. And we're hearing that a lot lately, right? Like, you might have been a numbers person, now you got to be both in order to be influential. So really, really great takeaways there, Anders. Okay, so we've kind of talked about where we've been, but we got to talk about where we're going. And we've alluded to it a few times here, of course. AI is the name of the game lately. What is the future of finance looking like, and how can businesses remain resilient and adaptable in the face of all this change with AI and ML and everything else that we're kind of inundated with right now?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to sort of insert the generative AI Anders here and just ask, you know, what it thinks, right? But okay, there's probably a reason that it's a human Anders that is here, not generative AI Anders that's here. But that's probably coming down the road as well. You know, but I think, you know, where are we heading with technology? And I don't know, you know, if there's any Star Wars fans out there, but I always like to use this example of the situation in Rogue One, which is one of the spin-off movies that came much later on. And here, kind of the rebels are going on a very dangerous mission, and they're bringing this kind of misfit along because she has some vital information that is needed on this mission here. And then, of course, you have a droid there which can calculate at breathtaking speed, all the possible scenarios that would happen if you bring this person on board. And the droid is telling the leader of the mission, if you bring her on board this mission, there's a huge risk that we're going to fail.
Right.
But of course, they bring her on anyway, and because she's there, they actually succeed. So we're not at the point yet where you can just ask the AI and say, what if we do this and that? How is it going to fall out? Yes, it can give you some scenarios and some potential outcomes, but it's still humans making the decisions. It's still humans, at least in most industries, executing on those decisions. So it still comes down to the capabilities that we have in the company, our ability to execute on the choices that we make. And I think if you speak about technology, then, well, you talk about predictive analytics, right? So we can much better now predict where is it most likely that we're going to land with all the information that we have available. So let's just say you have a target that says you need to be at 100 million, and then if you use predictive analytics, it tells you you're most likely going to be at 94 million. Okay, that's probably the best possible forecast that we can get. You can then discuss in the leadership team, are we okay with that? Or do we actually need to take action? Most likely you will need to take action, but then you're not talking about what the number should be. You're talking about what are we going to do about this? So that's the predictive part. And then, of course, I think the holy grail is maybe the prescriptive part, right? Where you're getting potential actions to take, which you still need to evaluate, of course. But I think if we can take those final two steps up the analytics ladder, that's really what we want to enable finance teams with, so that they have that information almost, by the snap of a finger when they're having these discussions with the leadership team or whoever they support down the ranks in the organization. That's when it becomes really, really powerful and really, really exciting to be in finance, when you have all these insights at your fingertips.
So I want to hit on something that you kind of said here. So you have all this technology, and for example, AI, and you can ask it all these questions, but it does it, to your analogy, the Star Wars analogy, it doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the outcome. So what role does gut play in this? What role does just going with your instinct play in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, right, it's not that we should say guts and instincts are not relevant. They're super relevant, right? Because, again, speaking about AI Anders, right, if there was an AI Anders, maybe it could incorporate all the experience and instincts and gut feeling that Anders is all about, but maybe that's science fiction still, right? So, of course, we need to, put the insights in front of the most experienced leaders that we have in the company and say, based on technology and analytics, this is what we see. With your experience, what do you kind of see? Does that make sense? And even if we all agree it makes sense, what do we then do about it, right? So there's still a lot there that we need to rely on instincts and gut. I'm just saying that let's not aim to make gut or instinct-based decisions alone. Let's not aim to just make data-driven decisions. Let's try to pair these two, because that's where it gets really, really powerful. It just requires that the finance team is ready on time and is able to influence these business leaders to socialize the insights.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is a great note there to end on, at least from my questions. Anders, is there anything else that you'd want to add for our audience?
I think it's just important to say that, at the end of any change that you want to make, be it to, new tools or new processes, there's a human being doing something differently, right? So let's not forget about the humans in the modern finance function. I mean, they're the ones that are really out there driving the outcomes that you're looking for. And maybe they don't have the skills today to do it the way you want it to, but then it's on you, if you're the leader, to get them those skills. And if you're an individual watching this, then think about, how can I actually remain relevant in this more technology-dominated environment today? Because you are definitely relevant, but you may need some new skills to succeed.
That's a great note there. Thank you, Anders, so much for joining us today. So much great insight. Definitely looking forward to diving into the ebook even more.
Thanks a lot for having me, Kendall. It was really fun to be here.
And as always, thanks to all of you for tuning in. Again, make sure to read our latest ebook from Anders, The Modern Finance Function. You can read that by clicking the link in the description of this live, wherever you are tuning in from. And with that, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.